I will use the cargo pants to create the stitch. Currently, the object browser shows a default Topstitch item. Topstitch tools include Edit Topstitch, Segment Topstitch, Free Topstitch, and Show 2D Topstitches. First, let's look at the differences between the Segment Topstitch tool and the Free Topstitch tool. Select the Segment Topstitch tool from the 2D window toolbar. You can see a segment is highlighted when you mouse over on a pattern line. Left-click to create top stitch. With Free Topstitch tool, you can designate start point and end point of top stitch by left-click. Created top stitch line is highlighted in pink. As OBJ stitch has default offset value, it will create top stitch to the inside of the pattern outline. With the Segment Topstitch and Free Topstitch tool, you can create stitches by dragging areas. By dragging the entire pattern with the Segment Topstitch tool, create stitches on all segments of the entire pattern. Since the Segment Topstitch is stitched per segment, the corners are not connected as shown in the 3D window. Let's add stitches to the entire pattern with Free Topstitch tool. The stitches created with Free Topstitch have corners connected. After selecting all the stitches with the Edit Sewing tool, set the corner type. When you select a stitch, the Stitch menu appears in the Properties window and check the curved option for corner in the middle. You can see that the stitches in the corner are changed into curves. Let's move to Property window, Corner, Length, and change the value. You can find the curvature of the corner get larger. Since there are not many connected corners in this garment, we will create Segment Topstitch on the whole garment and modify it. A Segment Topstitch has been created for both the outline and interior segments of the entire pattern. In the Object Browser, change the properties of the default Topstitch to a slightly thicker stitch to illustrate natural cargo pants. When you select Topstitch item, stitch attributes appear in the Properties window. Let's change the stitch length and thickness. When you change the properties, stitches in 2D and 3D are also updated directly to the corresponding values. Adjust the spacing between stitches. Check Applied Stitch options match your outfit. Change the color of the stitch to the color that matches the outfit. When you click the thumbnail of the color menu in the Properties window, a color palette window appears. Let's delete unnecessary stitches with the Edit Topstitch tool. After selecting the stitch to be deleted, press the Delete key on the keyboard. Since stitches are created per segment, we'll delete intersected stitches and extend only one stitch. And delete the stitches created along pocket internal line. Now let's change the back pocket stitch to a 2-line stitch. First, delete the existing stitches. Copy the default top stitch from the object browser. With copied stitch item check, select Free Topstitch tool and create stitch on pocket line. The outer lines except the top line of the pocket create a stitch at once. I will change the property values of the pocket stitch item. Select the item, change the number of lines to 2, and modify it to distance in the properties window. Let's create bar track stitch where the stitches are intersected on the top of the pocket. Add stitch items in the object browser. Change the preset to bar tack and modify the stitch color to the same as the existing stitch. Create a bar tack stitch line with the free Topstitch tool. Bar tack line of pocket usually continues to the end of the 2-line stitch. By adjusting the bar tack item properties, you can modify the offset, thickness, length, etc. to match the costume. Now, let's create a bar tack stitch on the front zipper. After confirming that bar tack stitch is checked in the object browser, use the segment Topstitch tool to create a bar tack stitch on the internal line. Creates a bar tack stitch on the front of the zipper too. However, the currently used bar tack stitch has a large offset value, so it does not match the front zipper. Copies existing bar tack stitch items. Drag and drop the copied bar tack stitch over the existing internal line stitch and assign it. Because it is difficult to assign the stitch at the end of the zipper by dragging and dropping, select it with the Edit Topstitch tool and assign it using the Assign button. Adjust the offset value to 0 in the attributes of the added bar tack item so that the stitch comes to the center of the line. Now, let's make bar tack stitches and reinforcement stitches on the sidelines. Select the stitch that is created in the internal line segment of the sideline and assign it to the bar tack stitch by pressing the Assign button. To create a reinforcement stitch, select the existing 2-line stitch item, then use the free Topstitch tool to create a stitch in the sideline. It seems the stitches does not look natural, so I will copy the existing 2-line stitches and modify the properties. Select the reinforcement stitch created with the Edit Topstitch tool and assign it to the copied stitch item. Adjust the number of lines, distance, and offset of the copied stitch item. Let's change the reinforcement stitches to a different shape. After selecting the stitch item, select Zigzag and Preset in the Properties window. Change number of lines to 1. Readjust other values to create desired shape. Create zigzag stitches along the sidelines of incision pattern. Let's change the stitch of flap. Select an existing flap stitch and assign it to the 2 line stitches in the object browser. However, the stitches of the flap are all made of segment stitches. The corners are not natural. Delete stitches on the side and bottom of the existing flap and create them as free top stitch. Edit stitches in other flaps as well. I will modify the stitches of the front section improvement and the inseam section with a double stitch. First, delete unnecessary stitches. In the object browser with the 2-line stitch selected, create a 2-line stitch with the segment stitch tool. Or select an existing stitch and assign it as a 2-line stitch item. Also creates a bar tack stitch on the flap. I will create an internal line to create a hem stitch, then I will make a stitch. The stitches of the front internal line are opposite to the back side. In this case, after selecting the stitch with the Edit Top Stitch tool and check Flip in the Property window to switch the direction.